we're so excited to introduce our speakers. As we were reading everybody's surveys from last time, the number one requested item for this session was marriage. And so when we're praying about it, and I know Kurt and Rhonda they've spoken everywhere. They've actually come to our MOPS group a couple times. They're so highly recommended. And so I'm like, we got to get them on board. And then Kurt sent us the topics, and one was get your romance on. And I'm like, we have to do this because who isn't still recovering from COVID with your husband? Like, I mean, it just spoke to us, and it spoke to our leaders, and we had so much fun with it. So we're so excited to have them come up, and I'm going to do a little bit of an intro for them before I bring them up. Kurt and Rhonda bring a unique insight to marriage relationships from scripture, research, and their 39-year partnership in pastoral ministry and marriage. They direct Between Two Trees, a marriage education, consulting, and retreat ministry, helping churches maximize the care and nurture of growing marriages. They're also couple mentors of the Master's Program, a national marketplace leadership mentoring ministries. The Hamners lead a team of theologians and practitioners who developed the marriage, its foundation, theology, and mission in a changing world to inform couples and communities as they have that necessary conversation about the future of marriage. Kurt and Rhonda travel across the country and around the world, bringing biblical perspective and practical tools together in a way that reaches couples across the generations. We're so excited to have them. So please give them a warm welcome, and we're going to go ahead and get started.
We are thrilled to be here, and as we told Shannon, this is the first MOPS we've been to since COVID. And we started thinking, are we ever going to be asked again? Is it ever going to happen again? Because we love this ministry. I was a mentor mom at the Fullerton Free Church for years when Kurt was on staff there, and that was where we were living. And I loved being a mentor mom. And as I was talking with Jan at our table, MOPS was just starting when I became a mom the first time, but it hadn't spread across the country, and so it wasn't something was available to me, but I could have really used it. It's just a kind of a lonely time for me. My husband was in seminary. We didn't have but one car, so he took that to work and school. And I remember one time sitting in front of the TV watching Mr. Rogers, and the kids are in front of me, had a new baby, folding clothes, and Mr. Rogers said, I like you just the way you are. And I started crying. And I remember thinking, I gotta get out of here. This woman is in trouble.
We do love that. Is it okay? Can you hear me okay without that? Is that cool with you, Matt? Good. All right. We really do appreciate the MOPS ministry and have watched it for years as it has developed, and to see it coming back here at the church is really, really exciting. I always love to watch and see the different MOP ministries and how they develop and kind of the question. But that common question is that just seems so strange to me, and that is the idea that says, anybody pregnant? You know, I just imagine a guys group. You know, I guess if they had it, it would be called DOPS, dopes. That's probably why they don't have it. But I just see that question, guys sitting around the table, maybe having beer and brats or something, you know. And they ask the question, hey, has anybody gotten your wife pregnant? Yeah, me. You know? And everybody's really proud of it. You know, it's like, not to embarrass, you know, anybody pregnant? You know, it's a whole different approach to it. But we do. We love being here. We drove down, let me see here, Matt, make sure I'm working here. Oh, power on, right, Matt?
Anyway, we drove from Forest Falls, which is southeast of Big Bear, which is where we live most of the time. And we have a foot of snow still. I mean, if you can see it on the mountains. It's beautiful.
It's the one that says on and off.
And one little correction, I think Kurt said an old bio. We have been married 45 years, not 39 years. So we want to get credit for all of those.
So we drove down from this little place up in Forest Falls, And God has just given us the opportunity to have this place, but we use it for our ministry. We have what we call focused retreats. One of the things that we do and love to do is coaching couples. If you're ever at a place where you're just looking at that and you say, do we need some counseling? Do we need some coaching? That's one of the things that we do. We were talking to the table back here that said often guys, it's hard to get them into marriage counseling, but if it's called coaching, they're much more willing to do that. And so we do what we call a focused retreat. Most therapists would call it an intensive. I would never go to an intensive, but I would go to a focused retreat. One couple at a time. We host you in our home for a weekend and just kind of take you from where you are to where you really need to be or hope to be. And then what we do, one of the things that's been an ongoing part of our ministry is what we call a bed and breakfast with a purpose. So in different B&Bs around the country, we host 6, 7 couples at a time in a bed and breakfast setting to have conversations about where your marriage is, where you might want it to go, and what God's intent is for it. So that's where we live. That's where we do our ministry when we're home. And so we just wanted to give you a little bit of an insight into what we're doing.
So we are talking about romance this morning. So I want you to start thinking, though, about you probably had 7 meals this past week, and probably some of them were better than others. You know, that night when things just don't go well and you just, open a can of beans and, make bean tacos or whatever. It's not the great meal. But most of them probably had flavor and nutrition in mind when you created it. So when you're creating a meal, you're thinking about what would be a balanced meal for my family, along with what's in my refrigerator and available. So, but if you were hosting people, you might kind of go for a little more presentation. Am I correct? If we have time, we'll do some preparation that is a presentation. And once the meal is planned and prepared and ready to serve, the last thing that you do is the garnish, right? Well, we look at the romance as the garnish to marriage. It's not the main deal. You can't have a whole meal of hollandaise sauce, that would not be balanced or the purpose of a meal. You can't just have the edible flowers. That would not be a fulfilling meal. But it sure makes you want to come back to the table when you see a meal like that prepared for you. So today, we want to talk about what are the components that make for a healthy marriage, a thriving marriage. And so in that illustration, what would it be? What would a flourishing marriage have? Well, emotional safety, healthy communication, respect, responsibility, affection and love, a spiritual component and connection. So romance is the garnish that sets these components off in our marriages, as well as just makes us want to come back to the table. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
But romance is a lot of fun, isn't it? And the passion part of marriage. And it's the kind of thing, as Rhonda said, that continues bringing you back to really call yourself into those really important parts about what the meal is all about. Romance and passion is a part of the bonding that leads to intimacy. It's been that way from the very beginning. The first marriage that God created in the Garden of Eden between Adam and Eve was a man and woman coming together and realizing the passion that existed between them. Imagine it for just a minute. As Adam has been living in the garden for a while by himself and realizes how all alone he is, God puts him to sleep. He wakes up, and laying next to him is the most beautiful woman who has ever existed. Laying next to him, absolutely naked. Imagine what's going through Adam's mind. There's a sense of passion. There's a sense that turns into romance. And it really turns into romance when Eve awakens and opens her eyes and looks next to her. And laying next to her is the most incredible, handsome, well-fit man that's ever lived. And what's going on inside of her mind, and this sense of passion and this sense of romance that begins to flourish, and this garnish that is added to everything in the garden that begins to happen. And it is at that point that God has designed this sense of romance to move them towards intimacy. The Bible says that for this cause a man shall leave his father and mother, shall cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Intimate. Brought together. And so that sense of intimacy begins with a passion. begins with the romance, because romance is really that sense of our similarities and our differences that really draw us to each other and allow us to find safety in each other and open our lives up completely. So it kind of moves like this. It moves from that idea of Adam and Eve, from passion, to the place of intimacy, but what exists between that is the idea of commitment. Passion, commitment, intimacy. And so it begins to unfold that way. The truth is that both men and women innately seek and desire that sense of intimacy, to really grow an authentic relationship, to find that place that it's safe to allow relationships to flourish. Unfortunately, in America, in the Western mindset, this idea of developing romance and the concept that we have adopted of dating doesn't necessarily fit so well into that idea that God originally designed. Dating is all built around all of the flourish of what the beginning romance looks like. It's the flourish of the garnish that our culture looks at and says, boy, if I could just live that way for the rest of my life with this person, wouldn't that be something? Wouldn't that be great? But the idea is to know that when we are in love, God has created us and designed us in such a way that we are to have that holistic experience. Not just like the animal kingdom, but like those who are created in the image of God. God is moving us with passion, which is some of that animal sense, towards that sense of intimacy, which is the soulish part of a relationship that Rhonda was talking about. And the garnish is the romance that brings us there. The truth is that when people fall in love, that God has created us in such a way that the brain releases a chemical cocktail. Peptides that create a high. I mean, they say that the kind of chemistry that happens in your brain when you fall in love is very, very similar to the kind of high that you get from cocaine. That's why we love it so much. That's why we kind of run there. And in fact, one of those peptides in that chemical cocktail that happens to your brain when you fall in love is called phenylethylamine, PEA. So some research psychologists have taken that and injected that as a serum into rhesus monkeys and observed them as they were doing that. These monkeys begin to fall in love with each other. They fall in love and become attached to the stuffed animal monkeys that are in the cage. They begin looking amorously at the researchers outside the cage because their brain is drunk in love, because their mind has changed. What a good God we have, who has given us that opportunity to experience that in such an incredible way. When that brain cocktail begins to engage our mind, everything is more wonderful. Sunsets are more beautiful. Music is more symphonic. Couples talk incessantly. They stay up late at night because they have lowered their risks, the inhibitions to share themselves with each other. Even going to Walmart at midnight is more fun, when you're in love, isn't it? So what it is not only has it that chemistry, but it is the idea of our lowering our inhibitions. When you fall in love, you begin to lower your inhibitions. When you are feeling that sense of passion and romance, you are more open. You begin sharing more of yourself. It's like, I don't know, I've never shared that with anybody, and here I am sharing this with this guy. And so that sense of romance that begins to develop. It's the problem in our culture, though, is what we have done culturally is we have kind of taken that idea that romance is everything. Isn't that what we see in Hollywood? Isn't that what we see on TV? If you don't have a romantic relationship, you've got nothing. How often do you see in TV or movies a romantic, passionate relationship between a married couple? It's usually an unmarried couple or a couple who are living in an affair. That's where we see Hollywood saying, that's where this idea comes from. This idea that your brain chemistry facilitates an environment to risk less intimidation. We begin to take some risks. So when we fall in love, we begin to take risks. We actually accept a date from this guy that maybe we never thought that we would, or we never knew. It's a blind date or whatever. We then accept a second date. Finally, we realize that we're going in an exclusive relationship with this guy. We're engaged. We're married. We lower our inhibitions and we enter into this relationship. C.S. Lewis said it this way, reflecting on love. He said, it is not love, this romantic attraction. It is not love or this romantic attraction that the engine of marriage runs on. Being in love or passion, romance, is only the explosion that starts it. And yet every marriage relationship still is looking for that sense of romance because that keeps the relationship alive. It brings the garnish to the relationship. And so we take some risks, we go on a date, we get engaged, we get married, and then a few kids come along, and all of a sudden we look at each other and we say, whatever happened to that couple that first fell in love? What happened to the romance that brought us together in the beginning? The truth is, that was the gas that got the relationship going, but it's not enough. That sense of mystery, intrigue, and the risk of courtship phase, that was only the spark that got it started. There's more to it, and more that can be refreshed, renewed, and brought back into your relationship.
Yes, so I hope you're not hearing us say that romance is optional. We're not saying romance is optional, like a garnish actually is optional to a meal, but it is what brings energy to a relationship. And that's how you have a long-term relationship, is continuing to bring energy to your relationship and not coasting on what you had in the beginning that starts to fade. I don't know if you mentioned, Kurt, but the research has shown that 6 months to 24 months into a relationship, that kind of energy of passion fades some. And then it has to be reinitiated and nurtured and remembered and returned to. It's something that takes some work. It's not like it was in the beginning. So we want to talk about authentic romance that is not about infatuation. Infatuation could be the beginning of it, but it can't be the thing that takes you 45 years plus. So we love this quote by G.K. Chesterton. He said that romance is a sense of wonder and welcome. He was talking about the sacred romance, our relationship with God, when we realize the God who made all of this amazing world that we see around us and made us and made those sweet babies that we get to birth and nurture and care for, we're in awe, we're in wonder. And then we find out he has welcomed us into his family. Wonder and welcome. And that is the way it is when we meet one another. I remember when I first met Kurt, it was just a learning about, wow, this guy really has integrity. We worked together. So we worked together 16-hour days. We were working at camp. And I saw how he cared for relationships with other girls. He hadn't infringed on those relationships. He was truly a friend. And I saw how he treated his mother and his sisters. And I was taking kind of mental notes, and I was in awe of this man. I was thinking, he's really something. He's awesome. And then, when he invited me to be a part of his life, it was that welcome. And isn't it, when you think about your relationship, the wonder and welcome of what brought you together? There's a distinct theme throughout Scripture of romance. And we don't always recognize that because we're reading it on black and white, and a lot of times our thoughts are in a different place. But really, it is a love letter that God has given us that has romance threaded through the whole thing. It starts with Adam and Eve, as Kurt brought us to, and Adam and Eve were created in the environment where a relationship could thrive the best, in the garden. God created that so that they could really bond and have that relationship that he intended marriage to be. And then we see that God has actually called himself the great lover throughout the Old Testament as he relates to the children of Israel in their various wanderings away from him and coming back to him and wandering away. And he says, I am your lover, not these gods that you are pursuing. And then we see it in the New Testament with Jesus calling himself the bridegroom and the church his bride. And at the very end of Scripture, we're told about the marriage feast of the Lamb. And that's when Jesus comes back, and he calls it this marriage feast of the Lamb. Why? Because marriage is very important to God. Our culture says that it's just a contract or a man-made creation, but no, it was God's idea. and we have been privileged to participate in it. So it's a tapestry that is completed at the end of time, but also in Revelations 2, 4, and 5, we see another little hint of the romance that God is talking about when Jesus is talking to one of the 7 churches, and he's exhorting these 7 churches, ancient churches in Asia. And he says this to the church in Ephesians. He says, I have this against you. You have left your first love. Turn around and do the things you did at first. Okay, again, he's talking about the sacred romance. You were so in love with me. You were so on fire of loving me and pursuing a life with me and reaching to people with love, the love of God in the beginning, but that's waned a little bit. Turn around. Do the things you did at first. Turn around is another way of saying repent. Saying, you know, I think I've been pursuing the wrong things. I'm going to turn around and do the 180, the thing that I started out doing. And that's so often where we find ourselves in our marriages, isn't it? We have started, we had a great start, and then the kids come. Like I said, I was sitting in front of the TV, and Mr. Rogers touched my heart, you know, because I was lonely, and it wasn't just everything that I had dreamed of at that point. I was kind of lonely and wondering, you know, is this, you know, is my life just this, folding clothes, making meals, washing diapers? You know, we used to wash diapers, people. We don't do that anymore. But realizing, well, you know, it's up to me and up to my partner that we pursue the romance that we had in the beginning. And so we're going to talk about how do we pursue that.
You ever felt that way? That you or your husband have forgotten the early days of passionate love in your relationship? Has it seemed to grow a little stale? COVID, did it take a hit on your marriage? That first, second, third, fourth baby that came along? Did they bring a little bit of a damper to it? Could it be refreshed? Could it bring more to your relationship as you bring that sense of garnish of romance? Could it deepen the other areas of your relationship as you continue to grow? The words that Jesus had to the Ephesian church come from the idea of relationships. And Jesus might say to us today, turn around. Remember from where you have fallen. Remember what it was like when you were first in love. Isn't that what happens coming up in 12 days, Valentine's Day? All of a sudden we begin to think, well, it was so good in the beginning. And we begin to remember what that was like, and we begin to yearn for that. And we remember the events that we did and the things that brought that sense of passion and romance to our relationship, that sense that says, you are wonderful. And you felt that reciprocal relationship coming back to you, where he looked at you with stars in his eyes. Jesus says, remember from where you have fallen, what it was like then. And then what's the next part? Remember from where you have fallen, turn around, and do again what you did in the beginning. One of the ways to restore the relationship, one of the ways to restore that sense of romance and passion, is to turn around and do some things that you did in the beginning. What was your relationship like? What were most relationships like in the beginning? What were the components or the connections that begin to bring us together? Let's talk about them for a minute. 4 components of first love experience. What it was like when you first fell in love. The first one is the idea of connection and touch. What it was like to just connect with that person in such a more intimate way than anybody that you've ever done. And that sense of how touch was so important. The second one is the idea of risk and adventure. Taking some risk. I mean, taking a second date, taking a first date is always a risk. It's always an adventure with a new guy. It's like, okay, what's this going to be like? And then think of your wedding day, the beginning of the greatest adventure of life. Second only to that idea of what it means to know God and to follow Jesus. That idea of risk and adventure. Take some risks. Third is the idea of exclusivity. Moving into that place that's saying, just you and me and only you and me. And finally, the idea of admiration. What does it look like to bring that sense of admiration into the relationship?
So today we are going to give illustrations that are things you can do. This talk actually has another component. And sometimes we get invited to do a dad and mom's night, MOPS and dad's night, and we get to tell the guys what they need to be doing. But we can't tell you what the guys need to be doing.
Because if we actually were to tell you, hey, listen, if your husband would just come up to the bar, get up to bat here, we're like putting a target on his back.
Yeah, we don't want to do that.
Sending you home with it fully loaded. So what we want to do is to help you know some things that you can do to reignite that sense of passion and romance.
And if you notice, your little handout that we've given you is something to take home and actually do with your husband. And that way you can talk about what you have learned, and it's not you bringing it up. It's like, this is what happened in MOPS today. And so it's a little less intimidating for your guy. So let's start with a connection and touch. Lovers desire to be together. You remember what it was like when you just couldn't keep your hands off of each other. And that was just so glorious, wasn't it? We love to see that in young couples that haven't, really gone the distance yet. And that's still a part of their relationship. Shakespeare said the eyes are the window to the soul. One of the things that researchers have found, and maybe they have changed during the COVID years and months that we had, was that couples were not spending face-to-face time with one another. Somebody's watching the baby, somebody's cooking dinner, somebody's watching TV, playing a game. They're not actually face-to-face. And eye contact is so important. It's another form of touch, eye contact. And just kind of evaluate how much eye contact do you have with your mate. You know how important it is, eye contact with children. If we don't have eye contact and we're just yelling, don't do that, nothing really happens, does it? But if we get down on their level and we have the eye contact, there's a connection. And we see much more of a reaction from them that is what we were really looking for in a positive way. So the interplay between touch and connection is well played out when we look at the research of babies in orphanage. If a baby is not touched, a baby will die. We all need touch. Some of us have a greater need for touch than others, or tolerance of touch than others, but we all need it. And if it goes neglected in your relationship, you will pay the price. There will be a distance. We once were called in to counsel a couple. They'd been married 64 years. They had some traction on us. However, their children had set up the appointment, and they agreed. But they had been married 64 years, and they hadn't touched for 40 years. And when we sat with them, she sat over here, and he sat over there, and they told us this very sad story of an incident that had happened 40 years before, that they never unpacked, that they never sought any help to get through it or past it, and they just went on not touching. And so there was a lot of distance, and there was a lot of contempt. So we don't want to leave room for that in our relationships, that we are not taking the time to touch. And I know girls. I remember a time when Kurt would reach out and touch me at 10:30 at night, and I'd think, I've been so touched today. I don't know if I want to be touched anymore. And realizing, no. This is, very important that I keep a reserve for the touch this man has for me. It's not the same kind of touch, but I needed to kind of put that in my mind. Okay, yes, this era, this phase of child rearing is very touch concentrated, but this needs to be a relationship I have a reserve for.
Remember the first love. Remember where you have fallen. Remember first love, how important touch was. That idea that you would be walking together, just a little brush, and it was like, it's like electricity shoots all through your body, and then it's like, oh man, this brain chemistry is going on, and then take a little bit of a risk, and you reach in and you take her hand, you put your arm around her, and remember what that touch was like, and remember from where you have fallen, turn around and do what you did at the beginning. Take time to touch. Touch him. Let him know that you are thinking of him. Look into his eyes. Do you know what kind of touch your husband likes? You're going, listen, of course we do. You know? Rhonda just described it, you know. But do you really? Do you really know what kind of touch he likes? We have friends that she's actually a sex therapist, and she was doing some research and she was working on this idea of touch, and she thought she's driving with her husband in the truck, and she says, well, I'm going to try this. So she reaches over and kind of just grabs his arm and touches and strokes his arm. And she said, I wonder if he likes that. And she said, I think I'll ask him. So she did research with her husband. She asked him, she said, do you like that when they just reach over and touch your arm? He goes, no, not really. I feel like a small child when you're doing that. She said, the really important question, then what kind of touch do you really like? He said, I like the kind of touch when you kind of grab me and hold me close to you. And you don't let go. Do you know what kind of touch your husband likes? Do some research. Ask him. Ask him, do you know what kind of caring touch your husband likes? When he is at that place that he just needs to know your presence. He just needs to know your care. Do you know what kind of touch he needs at that point? What does it look like?
So with Kurt, it's like, would you scratch my back? And I used to say, does your back itch? No. I just want you to touch me. So you got to dig a little deeper than the initial communication. What is it underneath? No, he wants me to touch him.
What about flirtatious touch? Remember that? Flirting? How long has it been that you have had flirtatious touch between you? That idea that you reach out and pinch his cheek, and I don't mean his face. I mean, do you know what your husband likes that way? I mean, and again, there's a breadth of what that comfortability is with men and women. But do you know what it's like? Do you know what sensual, non-sexual touch your husband likes? Just that sense that says, scratch my back, just this sensation of what that does. Okay, I'm going to be honest with you. You know, every bit of touch for a guy is like, I wonder where this is going. You got to give us a little leeway in that, and recognize though that this idea of caring touch means the world to us. Flirtatious touch, sensual, non-sexual touch. In fact, I'm going to out your husbands a little bit. Many, maybe most, yes, most men seek sex because they're looking for a caring touch, a flirtatious touch, and just sensual touch. And we're so confused, and especially by our culture, that we think the only way that we can get that is by having sex with you. Ask him, do the research. In fact, let me give you an assignment for tonight, okay? So tell your husband tonight at some point, once the kids are in bed, it's just the two of you, just tell him, just go, hey, we had this couple at MOPS today. They were speaking on marriage. No, don't say marriage. Say they were talking about sex and relationships, and that gets his attention. And then just say, hey, listen, they gave us an assignment, and I need to let you know there's no strings attached. This doesn't mean anything beyond what happens for the next 30 seconds. But here's the assignment, babe. I want you to do this with me. It's called the 10-second kiss. It just says we're going to stand here, sit here, whatever, and we're going to kiss for 10 seconds. You know why that's meaningful? Because a 10-second kiss, kissing, as your lips engage each other, it actually begins to release hormones in both of you to the same degree that you would when you were nursing a baby or when you were having orgasm. It is oxytocin,
yes,
which is that bonding hormone that bonds your baby to you and bonds you together in intercourse. 10-second kiss is how long it takes to be able to generate oxytocin that is beginning to bond you together and to be able to say, hey, listen, we're not two, we're one. And it brings you together. So the second idea, first is connection and touch. Second is risk and adventure. Helen Keller made this statement. She said, life is a thrilling adventure or nothing at all. Guys, 45 years, we're convinced that marriage has got to be a thrilling adventure. It has been so fun for us to find out how much risk we can trust each other with because of the commitment that we share together. It is the idea of what is it like in that sense of remembering your first love, the risk of the first date, the risk of the first kiss. All of those things are taking a little bit of a risk. So what does it do as it begins to stimulate that passion, that brain chemistry that begins to change you? Romance is risky, secretive, and unexpected. Hear that? Risky, secretive, and unexpected. You know what else that describes? An affair. Many husbands and many wives find themselves tempted to an affair because of the lack of risk and adventure in their relationship, because they're looking for that sense of a little bit of risk, a little bit of secret, a little bit of the unexpected. What can you do to bring that into your relationship?
So first love romance dreams together, and that's this piece that having a dream is a bit of a risk because you may not accomplish the dream, or it may have to warp into something else because of family needs or responsibilities that you have or limitations that you have, but it's still exciting and brings new life to the relationship. Just think of Pixar's Up, the movie Up. Remember that book she had, My Life's Adventures? And so these are things that we need to be developing between us. And yes, the family is one of those life adventures, certainly. The marriage is one of those life adventures. But we need to have more adventures that we are looking to as we go through our married life. As a newlywed couple, we get to do a lot of premarital counseling, and we love hearing those stories. And then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do that, and then, it's just so exciting to hear all of the dreams. But we get together with a couple that's been married 25 years, and some of that has faded. There's been some losses. There've been some big disappointments, like that couple married 64 years. That said, this happened 40 years ago, and we never got over it. People let these things block the area of dreaming in their relationship. So, the fear, the disappointment, the loss, don't let those be blocks. If you're finding yourself in a kind of a block situation, get some help. Get some coaching. Some other voices speaking into it that can kind of say, yeah, we hit a rough spot like that too, and we made it through, and this is how we made it through. A motivating dream can take us through difficult times. So we had a time when Kurt lost a very significant job. And our youngest was a senior in high school, and we had just moved him 3 years prior to that to the mountains, which was a hard move from Orange County for him. So we knew we could not move him during his senior year. That was just out of the question. And the job Kurt got in this job loss was over 100 miles away through LA. So he lived for 2 years separate from us. We would come out on the weekends. It was a church job, so we would come and have church on Sunday with him, but have to come back because of school for Graham, our youngest. And during that time, we realized, the enemy has a target on our back. We're in marriage ministry. We're living apart. How do we explain this? It's not something we would recommend, but it was the situation we found ourselves in. So how do we make the best of it? So we had a dream. We'd never been to Kauai, and we wanted to go to Kauai. So we said, when God resolves this dilemma for us, and we are finally under the same roof, we're going to go to Kauai, and we're going to kayak the Nepali coast. Tandem kayaks. It's like, I don't even remember how many miles it was, but it was amazing. But anyway, that was the dream. And so for the 2 years that we were separated, like every month, one of us would reach out. And the first one was from me, and I reached out with a Hawaiian shirt and a little card that said, "Dream of Kauai, I wish it was today." And then some months later, I got tropical flowers at my job, and the note was there. And that note went back and forth for 2 years as we dreamed for this better time, but we made good in the time we had to that better time.
One of the things that dreaming does is it puts you in the future together, which not only does it stir that sense of romance, but it stirs the sense of commitment. That 2 years, once we got through that hard time, we were going to be together because we were going to be in Kauai doing open ocean kayaking on the Nepali coast. Truth is, not both persons in a couplehood necessarily have the same adventure comfortability or risk comfortability, and so you need to think through that. Rhonda took a huge risk on that trip that we did on open ocean kayaking, 17 miles. It was supposed to be a 2-hour kayak trip. It ended up being 5.5 hours because the surf was so high and the wind was so strong. 2/3 of the way, Rhonda really took some risks and was willing to do that. I thought I was the adventurous one. About 3/4 of the way across that journey, I got sick, and that's all I'll say. And Rhonda really kind of led the last quarter of the way to the finish of the thing. The bonding that we had in that, the thrill with each other of the unexpected. Romance thrives on a sense of variety. That's why dating is so fun, because it's a variety of things that you are doing. Variety, risk, triggers the pleasure center of the brain, and you begin to think through that. So do that. It doesn't have to be a trip to Kauai kayaking. Let it just be a simple thing. Carpe diem. Take advantage of the moment. I mentioned a few minutes ago the idea of an affair. It's really interesting. You know, when you see a couple in an affair, they're going back to those first love kinds of things. Not their first love, but what that experience was. Remember when you first fall in love, you'd do anything to just catch a glimpse of him. No matter what stage of life, whether in high school you'd hang around his locker. You know, college, you would go by wherever it was he hung out, the pub, the coffee shop, the study place. And you wouldn't even necessarily need for him to see you if you could just see him. But if you caught a glimpse of each other, just that momentary idea of the stimulation of the brain, do those again. Look for those ways to just momentarily reach out to him. Texts. One of the best things that a text can be is a word of encouragement, a sense of a dream. I'm looking forward to seeing you. And it doesn't have to necessarily be all about a new adventure that's coming. It's just the adventure that is. So you've got the idea of connection and touch, risk and adventure. The next one is the idea of exclusivity. Over the generations, over the periods of time, that kind of terminology has been used from the old days of fraternity days of pinning someone to the old days of courting to going steady when we were in high school to going out to whatever the term is now. The idea of exclusivity. You look at each other and you say, this is good, what we've got going here. Let's make this exclusive. I won't go out with anybody else if you don't go out with anybody else. And we begin to make this thing exclusive between the two of us. There is this idea of a sense of a relationship that we have that is different than any other relationship. Exclusivity is what you had in that point when you really believed that that sense of romance and passion was moving you in a future direction of exclusivity. And you begin to say, I don't want to be giving my affection, I don't want to be giving my attention to anybody other than you. Exclusivity undergirds a relationship. We often find for us to really find these relationship rituals. A relationship ritual is something that just belongs to us. You know, for us, we do a lot of travel. We're all across the country, usually flying. When we're driving, we're in California, up and down the coast. When we are driving, one of us will get the idea that it's time for a cup of coffee. But not just any coffee. Starbucks doesn't work. Pete's doesn't work anymore. It's got to be really good coffee. So somebody will get on their phone and they'll Google best coffee.
One of us is a coffee snob.
Somebody will Google and find best coffee within the 50-mile radius of where we are. We'll find a coffee shop, we'll get off of the 101, we'll get off of the 5, we'll get off of wherever we're going, and we'll find that coffee shop. And a lot of people look at that and they go, that's really stupid. Well, that's our ritual, not yours. Get your own. You know, I mean, but find something that just works for you. We have one couple that told us what they do is every Tuesday night is pizza night. Another guy said, hey, what I love is I've created a ritual that on the third Thursday of every month, I come home with a loaf of bread, salami, cheese, and a bottle of wine or whatever your drink is. And we wait till the kids go to bed and we go to the backyard and we have what we call Bohemian night. And it's just fun for us. Find a sense of ritual. The idea of celebrating your anniversary, don't let your wedding anniversary go by without celebrating it. So many of us just get to the place that it just becomes routine. It's another day. We do something casual. It is the day to celebrate the exclusivity of your relationship. Celebrate your anniversary like you did when you were first in love. We were out to dinner a number of years ago, and we were sitting there and we were watching this very young couple, very young, and they were just talk about brain chemistry. I mean, it was just oozing out of their booth, and you could just see it, and it's like, oh my gosh. And so I lean, you know, when you get to be an old man, you just lean over to everybody's table and talk to them, you know. And I just lean over and I go, hey, it looks like you guys are celebrating something big. They go, yeah, it's our anniversary. I go, oh, great. What year? Or what anniversary? And they said, it's our 12th. I'm going, no way, this couple has been married. I said, 12 years? They said, no, we've been together 12 weeks. Do you remember that when you first fall in love and you're willing to make this an exclusive relationship? You celebrate it. Think about that. Celebrate it. Celebrate big. Remember that vow that you made to each other, forsaking all other men for the rest of my life. I give myself only to you. That's what the marriage relationship is all about. It's the idea of exclusivity. And then that night on your honeymoon, you celebrate that exclusivity, that this sexual relationship between us is only between us. And I will not let anything come between us. I will not let anyone come between us. Exclusivity is most visibly celebrated in the sexual relationship, but it is also celebrated in the smallest little thing that you can do that says, you and me, we are one. We are exclusively for each other.
These are perpetual acts of dedication. And think about that in your relationship, and maybe when you have this discussion with your husband, talk through that. What are some of those rituals for us that are bonding? And if we don't have them, how do we create them? Now, just a disclaimer, I remember that time in our lives. I remember we had an older son, a daughter in between, and our youngest son. And it was our daughter in between that always put up a big fuss when we tried to do something, just the two of us. You never take us anywhere. You're always going off doing things with Dad, you know, the whole thing that they do. And, you know, you just have to kind of talk them through it and help them understand what's going on. It's not like a competition between them and your mate. It's that you are building a strong bond in your relationship that they are benefiting from. And how I used to do that when the kids were little was I'd say, well, you like to have a play date with Johnny. Well, Daddy and I are having a play date. That's why we're going to coffee. It's our play date. And so put it in terminology that they understand. But as they get older, it's like, you know, your friends, their parents are getting divorced. They've grown apart from one another. Dad and I are trying to keep this bond close so that we don't end up there. Because anybody can get divorced. And we don't want that to be our fate. So that gives them some context of what's going on and why it's important. And we also have a lot of couples that come that are from homes where their parents split up, and they are still trying, even as young adults, trying to make sense of their parents' divorce. And how do I enter into this relationship of marriage? Isn't it so risky that maybe I should avoid it because look what happened to my parents. And so even though your kids don't say, thank you for going out on a date with dad, they don't have the wisdom to do that. But later in their life, they may. Our kids have said that now. But it also is, if it goes missing, the child knows it's missing. So you need to have this kind of exclusivity. You're showing them what it's like. You are the first picture of marriage that your children have and the strongest for their future.
So we've got connection and touch. We've got the idea of risk and adventure, exclusivity, and admiration.
And admiration, when you were first together, just the thought of that person, you know, you just had so many admiring things to say about them to your friends, to your parents, and to them. But what happens in a long-term relationship is that we stop saying those things. We think, they know that I think they're great, or maybe I don't think they're so great, and so I'm withholding that kind of admiration from them. And that's taking a toll on your relationship. It's not a given. Maybe or maybe not they know. Don't take the risk of them not knowing. It is said that men have a desire to be respected and women have a desire to be loved. Scripture talks about this also. We think it's actually very true. Women also need to be respected. But what speaks to a man most is respect and then love. That's kind of the priority of how they hear this kind of admiration. But the practice goes waning, especially if you grew up in a home that affirmation and admiration was not a part of how you were trained or what you saw in a relationship. In fact, we grew up in those kind of homes. So when we got married, it was actually part of what we decided. That was then, that was what they chose, but we want to choose a different path. How do we develop a more affirming way of speaking to one another and seeing one another?
So we've actually taken that idea of admiration and broken it into two defining kind of expressions. Rhonda often says it's like an umbrella of admiration that we break into two segments called appreciation and affirmation.
So appreciation is gratitude for what a person does. So if you make a nice meal, or like we've talked about, or Thanksgiving when everybody's around your table and they say, thanks, Mom, for making that great meal, you feel affirmed that you have been recognized and your hard work has been affirmed.
Or if he fills your gas tank for you and you appreciate it.
Yes. And the second one is affirmation. It is gratitude for who a person is. So it's about their character. So we had a situation just yesterday where, because of all the cold weather we've had, the back doorknob froze. And so Kurt spent hours on trying to fix that so he didn't have to go 25 miles to the hardware store, get another doorknob. We were kind of pressed for time. He fixed it. And when I said, thank you for taking the time to fix that, I mean, that's huge. I wouldn't know what to do. So thank you. Thank you for doing that for us. That is appreciation. But affirmation is gratitude for his character. And I would say, I love how you take care of our family and our home and the people that are in our lives, because caring for people is top of your list. So, what happens when we actually do the affirmation? That goes to the very core of who we are, men or women. When somebody sees us, when they see into us, and they see what we're all about, that's the creme de la creme. So it's so important that we acknowledge the little things that our husbands do with the appreciation. Let's say he gets up, early years of marriage, got up, went to get bagels and coffee in the morning on Sunday so that you could get ready for church, or now you could get the family ready for church. And you used to just go on and on how wonderful it was, and now he does it and it's just routine and you never say anything about it. Well, what happens so often when those kinds of things happen in our relationship is that he starts thinking, well, it's not that important. And he might drop it. And then He might even feel he's not appreciated and feel resentful. And then he drops the whole activity, doesn't do it anymore, doesn't even ask, and then who's resentful? You are resentful. And so this is a kind of a cycle that we can get into, that we aren't appreciating even the little things that we do for one another.
Let him know the little things that are romantic. And Shannon, we're going to land this here in just a second for your timing here. Let him know the little things that you find romantic. Maybe you love flowers. So you call him up when he's coming home, or you're coming home and he's out about, and you're going to meet up at home, whatever the story is for you, and you call him and you go, hey, babe, I was just at Trader Joe's, and the flowers are out, the spring flowers are out, and the tulips are there, and you know how I love tulips. Would you bring some tulips home when you come? Then he comes home, he goes by, he picks up the tulips, he comes home, he comes to the door with flowers. You love getting flowers. He comes through the door with flowers, and you go, oh, you brought me flowers. I love it when you bring me flowers. That is so romantic. Listen, we are dull, but we are trainable. Help us know what it is that you find to be romantic. If he's not the romantic type, help him to know that. Let him know by your appreciation what that looks like.
And a little bit about affirmation is that, Valentine's Day coming up, we all buy a card. Hallmark, and all of the other now companies that make cards, they really, it's like spending money to say nothing. Have you noticed that? If I go and try to buy one of those ready-made cards, it's just like hopeless. I leave just frustrated. Buy a card that's got a nice front to it or something meaningful for you as a couple or your mate, and write your own message. And speak about respect.
Did you hear what Rhonda said earlier, that men are dying for respect? Always, but particularly in our culture, and particularly from you. So when you give them a card that just says, hey babe, I love you, it's like, yeah. But when you write something inside that says, I respect this about you, that's a sense of affirmation. That goes to his soul.
And the other part is that once we become parents, we often that becomes our go-to affirmation for one another. Kurt's a great dad. Kurt is a great dad. He wants to know that I think he's a great dad and that others think he's a great dad. But he wants to hear that he's more than that. He wants me to see the man that he is. He wants me to appreciate his body, that he takes care of himself, and that we can have an active life even in our 70s because he takes care of himself, and I admire that about him. He wants to know that I desire him. That's what they want. That's what our guys want. They want to know that they are desirable to us. And so often we end up with you're a great dad, which is important, but they want so much more because they're so much more than just a dad.
Remember that G.K. Chesterton definition that Rhonda gave you? The romance is a sense of wonder and welcome. When you first fell in love, that first love kind of romance is the awesomeness of love. It is the awesomeness of who that guy is. And then that you welcome him into your life. This Thanksgiving, this Valentine's, let him know that you think that he's awesome, that he's wonderful. And then welcome him into your life. Have you lost that first love? Has the relationship gotten a little stale? Mm-hmm. We're not going to put a target on your guy's back, but we want to give you some insight. Turn around and remember what it was like in the beginning. Find some of those same things, those same places, those same words. Turn around and do the things that you did at the beginning. We're going to just give you one last view of kind of our ministry. Well, that's us. So the first picture you saw of us was on that Kauai trip. This is what we do. We call it marriage adventures. We do marriage adventures in the Scottish West Highlands, 6 couples at a time, 8 days on the trail, hiking together, talking about what the marriage relationship looks like. So we have really worked not only to keep this marriage adventure alive for us, but for other couples as well. And so come join us on the Scottish West Highlands in May. The other that, if you had the desire, there we go. If you have the desire to know more about our ministry or about to share it with your husband, on February 18th at the Shoreline Church in San Clemente, we're doing a special night called the Cowboy Valentine, country western music, line dancing, the best barbecue that you will eat in California.
It's
will be
free.
served.
It's also free.
If you have any interest in that, you can go to our website, betweentwotrees.org. Go to, I think it's the About Us page, and no, contact, and it'll give you an opportunity to RSVP. Come join us, and that's February 18th. We'd love for you to come be our guest. If we can serve you, if we can serve your church, if we can serve your marriage in any way, I'm going to leave a stack of business cards up here, and
My purse, I'll bring them up here.
and feel free to grab one of those. Contact us. We would love to be able to connect with you any way that we can serve you. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.